All right, everybody. So excited for this discussion from on Unfiltered and Unqualified. I hope you appreciate my life hack. Because I mess up our name so much, I just put our name as the first slide so I could read it directly.
So proud of you,
I'm
Joe.
thinking big brain moves here.
Mm-hmm.
This is good. This is good.
I am amazed, even more so, at Brooklyn's presentation last week, where she popped that sucker out in an hour. I well overslept my nap that I took today after my morning shift from work, and I now found myself in a need to put a presentation together in 2 hours, and it's like butt ugly compared to her still. So bear with me. Just enjoy the intellectual thoughts and nuggets. We're going to be hitting just some moral dilemmas / just like questions I've been stirring in my mind of late that I think are pretty fascinating. And this first one is one that I've shared before. We're going to be talking about adultery, cheating, more specific, well, sort of, some of its implications. More specifically, we're going to get a little more dicey with the French and how the French, more than anyone else, are like that. They don't have this response of the girl on the right. Instead, the French are like, wee wee, woo. and how that has a
It's always
how
the
that
French,
has
man.
effect.
It's always the French.
Always. Yeah. And more specifically, I'm really fascinated of how the culture around cheating in France has led to fascinating public policy decisions when it comes to paternity tests. So, a couple stats for you. Adultery. Well, actually, you know what? Will you read these for me, Nephi?
Adultery is unacceptable for 84% of Americans, compared to 47% of the French. Is that 40% or like less or minus 40%? 40% of the French? Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and then 40% of the French don't even believe that it's a moral issue. So I should have rewritten these so that they weren't. These are just copied and pasted, but I should have rewritten them so they weren't like in the negative. But essentially, 60% of the French public are like, oh yeah, this is a moral issue. Compare that to America, it's like it's 90% of the population. So right away, I'm trying to like draw this distinction of how this is maybe just hard for us to discuss in the first place because just our backgrounds, thoughts on this are hugely different when it compares to the French, and not even that, but like their neighbors, some of their neighboring countries. These are stats on. This is a survey of stats of people who have who have cheated in these countries, and I mean, as you can see, the French are not necessarily like exceptions to their neighbors. Is this like surprising for anyone?
That's very surprising. Like,
any thoughts on that?
I knew that Europe was more godless than we are, but you know.
What?
I knew that Europe was more godless than America is, but that's just crazy. And when you say like cheating, is that like physical with like someone else of the opposite gender?
Yeah, having sex with someone else when you're married, or actually
or in a relationship.
Yeah, in a relationship.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Comparing that a little more again compared to the U.S. Some interesting stats. We find that in about 25% of marriages. So I'm not sure. Okay, so these are some of the finer details that I would have loved to have flushed out with a little more time. About how many people in the U.S. are cheating, is it actual marriage or just relationships? So I take it back. I think that this Telegraph stats might have actually been marriage, because I think that was it. I don't know. It definitely makes my stats look better, right? So we can run with that. But some interesting trends is that traditionally you see about twice as many men cheating as women, and that's what we see a lot for a lot of these countries. However, in the U.S. at least, in the last 35 years, the rate of men that cheat has stayed pretty much the same, and for women, it's up by 40%. So,
wow. I don't know if you have the Japanese culture in this presentation. Do you have it in here later?
Oh no, not at all. Do you know those numbers?
I don't have the numbers on them, but the general culture, from what I understand from Instagram posts and interviews and things, is like it's okay. Like people are okay with you cheating physically, but not like emotionally. Like if you just like go to a prostitute, then they're okay with it. But if it's emotional, then and it's like a relationship, then that's an issue.
I wonder if men feel as okay about a woman going to a prostitute, if that is even much of a thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one. That's a good point.
Joseph will often say
gosh.
that like men feel more betrayed if women physically cheat on someone else, and women feel more betrayed if their man emotionally betrays with someone else.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
So
yeah.
So thank you. Yeah, I think that's a very fascinating fact. But my main thought, intent for sharing these initial numbers is to try and just paint a picture of how, from a foundational background level, just what a different thought process and approach, just culturally, we're going to have to this. And so they're probably just looking at us and thinking we're crazy too, and that's totally fair if they also think that we're crazy. And I guess I just prefacing that I don't necessarily want to say I'm better than all French people in this respect. I know I'm better than all French people in other respects, but
in every other respect.
Every other.
I mean, they're French, man. They're French.
Yeah. So we'll just kind of hopefully have a little more, open-mindedness or charity in our discussion when it comes to paternity tests. So, as I have stated before in other podcasts, paternity tests are illegal in France.
Illegal?
And yeah, they are illegal. You're about to see the quality of my sides take a big upturn coming up here too. But yeah, so why are paternity tests illegal? So the arguments for why they're illegal in France is that it's to preserve the peace in families, to uphold the French regime of filiation.
What does filiation mean?
So the French regime of affiliation is just a set of laws, their legal code. So basically, it's to help preserve legal precedents, is how I read it and understood it. I don't know, Nephi, is that a fair assumption? I say
affiliation is the fact of being designated the child of a particular parent. So it's probably like the French government's establishment of families.
Yes. Yeah, the term, French, well, yeah, so that's definitely the definition for affiliation, and then the term, the French regime for affiliation, is like specifically referencing the code, the body of French laws that have to do with, your familial affiliation. So basically, like, maintaining legal precedents is how I'd say it, if Nephi can fact check me on that one.
I mean, that's what it sounds like. Yeah, it just sounds like because of the way that they have their system set up currently, in order to stick with more like the status quo, it sounds like that's what's happening.
Okay, cool. To paint a picture of how serious this is, if you take a paternity test without court authorization, you can face a year in prison and a $15,000 fine. Like,
jeez.
Wow.
And I just barely saw this last sentence of this paragraph I just pulled up. I just barely saw this just a second ago. So maybe I should have been adding some junk Germans on this slideshow too. But the German Bundesrat adopted a similar measure on May 15th. I was like, holy cow! And sorry, this 15 years ago, I did not update that. That was an article that was published in 2007. So what is it? 2025. So is that really 8? Is that, I mean, it's like 33 years ago now?
I think that's
Right.
28.
20,
28?
like 18 years.
15 years ago from 2007.
Okay.
So yeah, I think 28.
28? Awesome. Yeah, so, and then a final like craziness, I think, to the policies is that you are even prohibited from taking recreational genetic tests. So like Ancestry.com, you know?
Whoa, that's
Wow.
crazy.
I mean, the reason behind is because it tells you like how and who you're related, you know?
What about history in the church? Really
Rough.
though, yeah.
They'd say you're wrecking families.
Yeah,
having
but
a
like
big
those
test.
members can't be a part of their own family history.
Yeah, so isn't that super fascinating? I was like, holy cow, totally makes sense. I know of a specific person who took a test, found out their father was not who they thought their father was, and it turned out their father was actually a billionaire who had just recently died and didn't know that he existed and was in a legal fight to try to get some money back. So fascinating case there.
Wow.
But yeah, so like that stuff does happen. It can, right? So even recreational genetic tests are prohibited. So my question for you guys today: does society determine fatherhood? That's like the first. That's one of the big claims. What? Oh, did I not put that in? Why is it legal? Oh yeah. Wait. To preserve the peace of families. Oh,
Yeah, it's the last
I
one out
must
of
have
the link.
deleted somewhere. That was totally like I might have like
Nope, it's
cut
there.
one of the.
It's on the third
Your
one.
last one before the link.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. There we go. Yeah, because society determines fatherhood, not biology. At first, when I heard that, I was like, nah. But the more I thought about it, the more I think that they got a strong argument for their case. What's some first initial thoughts on this French claim? What are you guys thinking?
What's a father? And what's fatherhood? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think you got to make that difference because you can. I don't know. Because I guess
Keep
it
going.
depends on if you want to determine the definition of father to be like the biological male contributor, or if it's the person who raises the kid, you know? And I think just with those two definitions, I think I'm leaning towards the raising the kid. But
It is fatherhood.
yeah.
On.
Wait, sorry, we didn't hear you there, Joe.
Oh, we're good. I just had to rearrange a cable. Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. So if I understand right, you're saying you think that fatherhood is the act of raising a child. Is that right?
That would be my definition. Yeah. I think that it's the one who puts in the time, who puts in the effort, who loves the child. That would be the father. And that can be the biological or adopted or whatever.
Yeah, I like that definition. Anyone opposed?
I just have a question then. What would you call someone who does the dishes, who does the cooking, who does not work outside the home?
This is a trick question, Nephi.
No. I feel like the assumptions that form both of these arguments are based on the same line of reasoning. That if society is what determines this, then why does it not determine it in the other application as well?
We can clarify what you mean by what the other application is.
Yeah, just that historically, someone who stays at home, does the dishes, cooks the meals, doesn't work outside the home, right, is the mother. And if we're going based off of that perspective of, what they might do with that role, I feel like so many people that we would know, and I would reckon that even if I were to just ask you guys up front, I think you guys would be like, oh, well, I think, yeah, the traditional role of a mother is more of like nurturing the children and doing those things. But on the flip side, here, I feel like while there are some distinctions that I think are decisive, and I do think that ultimately it comes down to that societal perspective, creating this framework. Just like how Tanner said, well, okay, but what's happening, right? Who's doing that nurturing? Who's taking care of the child? In that case, then biology doesn't matter, right? If it's the post-biological inputs that matter. And so, at least specifically with respect to this, I'll probably dive into that a little bit more later in your slides. I'm thinking that, like, yeah, if we're saying that a family is made up of people who will care for their children, then I think that France has a good policy as far as fatherhood goes, if they're trying to help keep families together. But if we want it to be based off of, like, the biological sense, right? Especially if we feel that sexual immorality is indeed immoral and should not be happening, that there is some bond that is implicit for a father having a biological child, like that father should care for the child, for instance, then I think that it's not a good policy.
If you could give me the 2-sentence version of the takeaway you want me to have, what would it be?
Takeaway would be that coming from this as a societally, structurally functioning proposition, France has it in the bag.
Okay.
But
Hot take.
but
Love
it
it.
sounds like you are leaving it ambiguous as to which way is better.
I'd say, yeah. I think that morally, it's important for people to not be promiscuous. I think it's important for people to be monogamous. I think it's important for people to care for the children that they bring into this world. And I do think that there are exceptions. For instance, like in a rape case, I don't think the mother needs to have the biological father involved. And in that case, then, the societal definition of a father, maybe like an adopted father, for instance, would be really good, or could be really good. In the case of just like a guy and a girl hooking up, having a kid, and then what happens from there, I feel like there is a responsibility for the two individuals who have created the child to take care of the child as well.
Well said.
Interesting point of responsibility for your actions, which I guess I was reflecting a little bit on, like, the way that things are done in America, where you can find out who your biological parent is, whether or not they're involved in your life at all. And thinking about, like, well, is it better? Because is it a good thing to know, like, oh, my real dad is this person, even if he wants nothing to do with you, even if he's not interested in being any form of father in your life. But I think it's an important principle, holding people to responsibility for their actions. And people wouldn't have responsibility in a country like France or Italy if, they have, the man at least has zero consequences for having sex with somebody else. He has zero responsibility. Only personally, morally, he might feel guilt. He probably would, because I think that's kind of inescapable, maybe. But
Yeah, no, I like where you're coming from, Brooklyn. Like, I mean, for instance, if I were someone that didn't believe in the law of chastity, I feel like France would be a haven. I just go there and I just make sure to go have sex with all the married women. Because then all the kids are taken care of. I don't have to worry about it, and no one can come back at me.
yeah.
Fascinating. Wow. Well, I had 2 thoughts prepared in case some discussion was in need to be sparked. Like, yeah, what about in the case of adoption or people who lose custody over their children? But I think you guys have been killing it discussion-wise. Some last thoughts. A last thought on this then that I thought was kind of fascinating. Just going full circle back to the very first thing you said, Tanner. So I guess, sorry, first interesting fact is just father's time devoted to children care, at least in the U.S., has tripled over the last 50 years. So
That's
I
really
think
cool.
That's awesome.
yeah, and I think that just further, it's so cool to see one fact or aspect of society connect to others, right? Because I think this totally coincides, that creates a more complete picture with how, like, the women's rights movement got more women into work, and birth control, and I don't know, what's my thought? It's cool to see how it just is all connected. Life, the world. Does that make sense?
You're saying that like feminism is connected with fathers spending more time with their children?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think is most likely a direct result. Thank you. That's a great way to say that. And then,
Real fast, if you're going to move on to the next fact, can I say something on this fact, at least, the childcare part?
oh yeah, please.
I think one thing that's interesting is, I think when we see this fact initially, we're like, okay, that's awesome. You know, like fathers being more involved in their children's lives. Like, of course, we would love both parents being involved. But I think that's where we make that implicit assumption of, oh, it's just the father that's increasing, like status quo is good. But single father parenthood has also been one of the fastest growing populations in the US. Like, if we were to take the demographics, then, at least on the brief little Google search I just did, then it's single parent fathers that are also supremely on the rise. And I don't see that as a good thing. I think that
No.
the initial idea of what we want behind this, right, is that, yeah, we do want fathers to be involved with their children, just as we want mothers to be involved with their children. And so just as we see that it's an issue where the father steps out of the life of the children, I think this fact also keeps that kind of hidden, that while there's also women who step out of the father's children, or the lives of the children. Now, whether that's through like their own choice or accidents, whatever it might be, right? I'm not sure. But just something to consider as well. That's, I don't think, necessarily a good thing based off of this facial fact.
Love that, Nephi. Just because it's tripled doesn't mean that people were getting enough, or not getting enough time with their fathers beforehand. Here in general, huh? So that's true.
Yeah, for sure. That too.
And to bring it back to your point, Joe.
A few statistics to add to the pool, like maybe the fathers who are working aren't getting much more time with their children, but maybe they are, but we don't know based on that fact.
Yeah. I mean, there's also been a rise of like paternity leaves in the U.S. too, so hopefully that contributes some to that fact. Hopefully, I mean, to spend triple, I feel like for the time to be tripled, that's a pretty big number, but hopefully a large amount of that is not single fathers. That would be pretty sad.
At least the fact that I said too, since 1990, single fathers have doubled. And so if we were to go back another 20 years, I don't know how that would factor in if it were triple or even quadruple. So in that case, it'd actually be even less than, I don't know. But.
And you were trying to say something, Tanner? What was that?
So this might be a little spicy, but just like how you said that feminism kind of contributed to women spending more, or to men spending more time with their kids, it could also be said that maybe feminism, modern feminism, not like women's rights or anything, just modern feminism of being free, independent, strong woman who doesn't take care of her kids and, just has a career and focuses on that, that could also be a contributing factor to the single father rise. I'm not saying like the first wave feminism is a bad thing. I'm saying more modern feminism.
Yeah, no, that's super fair. To kind of wrap things up then, so we can move on to the next topic. If I were to summarize, I think we are actually in agreement with the French, right? That society does determine fatherhood. Then is that with the distinction that fatherhood is not the same thing as being the father, which is why I pulled up this last stat here. And this is just one of many stats that can be found, but that the brain of a new father goes through transitions analogous to the neural transitions experienced by a pregnant woman. Having biological parents gives an advantage, it does. there is an ideal, and because there's an an ideal does exist, and when it can be met, awesome, and when not, like all things in life, you just always try your best, and some things you'll make, and sometimes you'll make the ideal, and sometimes you won't, and that's okay. Life's imperfect, and you just do your best. That's my last thought. Any other distinction or thought to go?
I'm just curious if you know more about this stat that you just mentioned. Like,
I totally think it's super fascinating, and I barely found that just in time to come here. So I will invite you to look more into it for me.
okay, because I'm just curious if the father's brain changes because he's the biological father, or because he's just like taking on the new responsibility.
That is interesting. Yeah.
So maybe it isn't a biological father thing. Because, I mean, I don't really know how that would work biologically.
Super interesting.
Yeah, there's not really a connection. Like,
Yeah.
Well,
that
it's like
explains why I'm craving milkshakes when my wife is pregnant, man.
Yeah, like observing the pregnancy process.
I guess we have seen that taking the time and work for more preparation with your facts is helpful with these. So, our future children who are out there, main takeaway I want you to have is that we love you, and we are so grateful to be your fathers and your mothers. And definitely separate, though. But do some more research for us and let us know. Come back. But as for all the fun that I made towards the French, I feel like I gotta walk it back some. Yep. All right. Next story, y'all. Woo. This is Christina Murray. I tried to find a not so pixelated photo, so I'm sorry, Christina Murray. I'm sure if you saw this, you'd be like in such pain. This lady has a crazy story. She, for 18 months, she was trying intrauterine insemination. I'm not sure what that
Intravenous?
is. I'm not. No, it's
Intrauterine?
intrauterine
Insemination.
I'm not sure if that's a fancy way, because I know there's a fancy word when you just have sex with other people. Maybe that's like when you want to be pregnant. It's not IVF.
It's not IVF.
No. So she tried. Yeah, probably. I don't really know. Either that, or it's probably the fancy name for when you have sex with someone to try and get pregnant.
I think it means that they insert semen into the uterus.
Oh, and not an embryo.
Right.
Okay.
So it's like the opposite.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so she was doing that for 18 months. Didn't work. She finally tried IVF. Tons of tests, tons of injections. Basically, just trying to paint this picture that this lady was trying so hard to have a baby. Her life dream was always to be a mom. She finally got pregnant. So excited. In December 2023, she gave birth. And she said that, like any good mom, as soon as she held her baby boy in her arms, she just thought that he was the most beautiful and perfect being in the whole wide world. And it also became very quickly apparent that a mistake happened with her IVF because she had given birth to a African American baby when her chosen sperm donor to make her embryo was someone who looked more like her, blonde hair and light colored eyes. So this is that. She fell in love with her child, who she had carried in the womb for 9 months to term. But the clinic where she got her IVF treatment, obviously, thankfully, right, reached out to who they discovered were the rightful owners of the embryo that she was impregnated with. So they found out they didn't even use her egg. So the egg the sperm were not hers.
Biologically and all.
There was no biological relation.
I feel like you could sue for that.
After an expensive and lengthy court battle, the parents, the owners of the embryo, sued and got the baby.
No way.
And
did she get compensation, equivalent to surrogate mothers?
I I don't think so. I think that she has a lawsuit against the clinic now. And man, I got too caught up in the story. Darn it! I wanted to ask you guys what you think should happen, and then I was going to do that big reveal. But so, what's your thoughts? Should she have been allowed to keep the kid? Should she have gotten compensated as if she was a surrogate mother? I'm pretty sure. Well, at least they said nothing about that in the news story, so I assume no. They just said that she spent a buttload of money on a lengthy legal battle.
And on all of her treatment.
Yeah, and
Like
all
her-
that time that she had to put in and all the effort to giving birth to a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An emotional connection.
Yeah.
Well,
All of
also,
those things are
like,
so real. So
if the parents were embryo donors, were they donors or were they just like other clinics?
no, the clinic was like, because when you are doing IVF, they get like hundreds of embryos and you freeze them and whatever, right?
They just mix it.
Or maybe they don't freeze all the hundreds, just like a couple that work. But yeah, basically she was impregnated with someone else's embryo.
Like
You
by
know-
mistake. Wow.
I think I would feel like that was my child if it was my egg in your sperm and somebody else had our baby. I think I would want that child.
And if you gave birth to someone else's baby, would you feel like it's your child too?
Yes.
Well, that's
You're
the
right about
complicated
kids.
part, right? Oh
So-
my gosh.
Yeah.
With those emotions, do you agree with the resolution though? Should she have been able to keep it? One thing that I'm sure worked against her is that she is a single lady, and I assume that this couple who had an egg and a sperm are still a couple, but like we were kind of talking about earlier, the stats for single parenthood are not pretty, you know.
I say that we bring it back to the Bible teachings with King Saul. We just split the baby in half.
Woman? Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Baby for real.
There are some crazy parallels to that I didn't even think of. You're right. No, it was the test. Yeah, but wow. Nephi, you've been quiet on this so far. What do you think? Should she have been able to keep the baby or give it up?
Man, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm kicking myself because we went over a case very similar to this in my contracts class where there was a surrogate mother who contracted to bear the baby, and then after giving birth, mom's like, actually, I'm gonna keep the baby, and ran off with the baby. And now I don't remember if she kept the baby or not. In my mind, we lost it, but I was trying to look that up.
I think we're talking
She
about.
wouldn't have legally had any rights to the
I think we're
baby.
talking about the same case, Nephi, because we talked about it in my philosophy of law class. I think it's a pretty landmark, famous case. So I assume it's the same one.
Wow, that's why I'm kicking
And
myself. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't remember it.
If I remember correctly, but
Oh, you kind of cut out. Will you say that again?
if I remember correctly, she did lose the baby. But a huge difference between this case and that is there was no contract to be a surrogate in advance. You know?
That's
And she
true.
went through the whole
Right.
labor, believing it was her baby. So she does have an emotional connection with that child.
Yeah.
I just wonder what happened to the clinic, because they had to have been like in violation of so many things. Like they would have had to pay both families for this.
You would think so, right? Yeah, the end of the news article that I read just said that Murray is currently in a lawsuit against them, which I am sure she will win a bucket of money. I hope she would win a bucket of money. But I agree with you also, Tanner, that the couple who got the kid also probably deserve a bucket of money because now they have a surprise kid in their life who, they didn't.
Well, I mean, if they're
where a ton of bonding formed between a parent and a mother, and they missed out on all that, you know?
That's true.
Well, but isn't this just going against what we said with France, though? With France, we're just like, oh yeah, society sets it, so it's fine. Don't let them figure out who your parents are. And now we're saying, well, the real parents still be getting benefits because now they have this random baby in their life. I feel like in that way we're not really being
Well,
cohesive in application.
But this
there.
isn't really a problem with people having indiscriminate sex. This is more of an issue of the clinic giving the wrong embryo to the wrong patient.
I agree with you that it is specifically the issue of the wrong embryo to the wrong patient. What I do think is similar, though, is that regardless of whether or not one individual has an indiscriminate sex or not, like they're still involved parents. And it might still be very intentional. It might still be very discriminate sex for one French person and not the other French person. And so what I think really what it comes down to, at least in this specific scenario, is that, yeah, for the mom who bore the baby, but as far as the parents getting the new baby in their life, I think they totally assumed the responsibility when they sought the baby. I think any sort of benefits or any sort of resulting benefits that they should receive should come strictly from the donated cells rather than now having to take care of the baby. Because using the same logic that we used in France, I think that the current or the one who gave birth to the child would have been just fine having the child. And the parents who are the biological parents would have been just fine not having the child.
I understand what you're saying, Levi. Based on what we were talking about with parenthood and fatherhood with France, you think that she should have kept the baby?
I think it depends. I think if what we're saying is that it only comes down to that societal perspective, then yes.
I'm not as interested in what we're saying right now. What are you saying right now?
What I'm saying right now is that based off of what I felt like I was understanding from you guys a second ago.
Sorry, we talk. We talk as loud as you can. It's getting really quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know why. Okay, so what I was saying is that the logic used with France versus now seemed like they contradicted.
Because you're saying the French think that she should keep it or give the baby away, and you're saying that right now we're saying the opposite of which of those. But which one do you think the French would agree with?
With the mother keeping the baby and the parents not getting the baby.
Is that what you're saying, Nephi?
I would believe so.
Okay. I mean, I agree with that. I think she should have been able to keep the baby.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
I think it's funny. I kind of skipped in my rush of putting this together. I skipped the other big question with the French one was whether or not paternity tests should be illegal, because we talked about whether society defines fatherhood/motherhood, right? And yeah, I think that's mostly pretty much the case, but I do feel pushback in that I think that people should be able to do paternity tests because, like, nonetheless, if someone is cheating on you, I think that you don't have a legal requirement to take care of someone else's kid. You know, if you didn't want a kid, even especially, and they get pregnant with someone else, or this is a huge question. I totally had to skip, or just because of the very real and significant biological attachments that you have to your biological children. So I guess in that sense, I feel like I am being consistent because I'm saying because of this woman's intense biological attachment to this child through pregnancy. I think that's a really big reason for her to keep the child. A really big reason for her to not keep the child is the fact that she's a single parent, and it's keeping this child out of a two-parent. So that is.
But at the same time, she was still trying to have a kid, like.
Yeah, so it's not like it should be. Yeah, that's true. I'm not saying it should be illegal for her to be able to have a kid, huh? That's a great point, Tanner.
But on the other hand, in the context of like our church and how there's so many women who talk about their miscarried babies and how they're part of their family and they'll have them back in their family someday. Like, this is like a nightmare for women with that kind of perspective because they will if it was my embryo and somebody else got to keep that baby, I would forever feel like that child is supposed to be in my family.
So you're saying she should keep the baby?
No, I'm saying that the family should keep the baby, the biological family.
Because they are our blood.
Yeah, because that's part of that child is meant to be in my family. And I'm saying we're talking about like temporary, like earthly life, legal terms, XYZ, but I'm saying like that child is meant to be in my forever family, and like how I cannot possibly live with
the assumption that the children that you receive into your home has like this sort of heavenly, pre-earthly backing
and connection, and maybe even if it wasn't pre-earthly, post-earthly, like I don't know, like that child is. I mean, I would just feel equivalent to a mother who adopts out her child while she keeps others of her children, which when I temporarily worked at an adoption agency nonprofit in Salt Lake, I learned that most adoptions in the US are not like teenage pregnancies. They are middle-aged women who already have a good handful of kids at home and don't think they can financially handle another child. And so they adopt out their own child because they decide they cannot emotionally or financially manage another.
Most
right?
people who do abortions too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. But it would be like just like that, knowing like that child is mine and I'm not raising my child. And my child is over there and I don't get to see my child. And that should be my responsibility. My child should know me and our family heritage and the gospel or whatever, the way that I want to provide a life for my child.
I love that perspective. That is like so good. And we want families to be together. I'm going to offer a counterpoint. What about the families who do adopt and they feel like their adopted kids are part of their eternal family? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Go ahead.
Sorry, it cut out for a second, but you said they adopt and they feel like they're adopted.
Yeah, so I'm saying like a family adopts a kid and they believe that that kid is part of their family eternally, and that they're that's their forever family. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, of course, that's how they would feel, because that's what they need to feel, right? Like, they can't create their own family, so they're going to adopt, and what the children they adopt are going to be part of their forever family for them, right? I'm not invalidating that perspective. I'm just like exploring the perspective of the biological mother and how, like, she would feel a lot of guilt for not raising her own child.
Right, I 100% agree with that. 100% agree.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying, is just exploring that perspective.
Interesting. Oh, interesting stuff, y'all. There's one more topic I wanted to hit. Is there anyone who wants to put a last 2 cents in? Nephi? You haven't been able to share in a hot minute. You want to close us out on this and move to the next dilemma, next moral question?
Yeah.
Actually, sorry. I'm gonna call for a vote, and then I'll let you close us off.
Okay.
My vote is that she keeps the baby. Brooklyn?
Are you saying the single mom? Okay.
I don't feel like I can vote.
Lame. No.
Share very extensive.
Be neither hot nor cold, lest I spit ye out of my mouth.
Come on, AFP. It's okay. Everyone understands. We don't have forever to give our explanation.
If I the adoptive mother, I would want to keep the baby. If I were the biological mother, I would want to keep the baby.
You're not either.
The attorneys don't care about.
You're the judge. Pretend you're the judge. Who gets it?
I don't.
That's okay. We know you don't know the legal. You don't know the full background. It's okay. What would you say?
You need to know all of the legal and all of the background.
Oh, so painful. To our future children, I am so sorry. That is
That your mom actually cares about things instead of throwing out
okay, Tanner.
randomly unresearched opinions.
What's your vote, Tanner? And then Eva, you close us out on this one.
Yeah, my vote is that she keeps the child as well. My perspective on it is through no fault of her own and through no fault of the other parents, but through the clinic that made the mistake. She had the best of intentions and she wanted the best of things, and I think that she was the one that put in the effort, put in the work to have the kid. And so I think that she would count as the mother there.
Right, Nephi, tell us your vote and then close us out, man. Whatever. Well, tell us whatever thoughts you want and then close us out.
All right. Well, can you hear me? Or is it still kind of weird? Again, sweet. I think that I would say that legally wise, I have no idea. Just like Brooklyn, I would have to actually study the laws. But I do feel like what ultimately I would say is, regardless of what the law says, the earthly law, I think that really it's only the gospel of Jesus Christ that would answer this question in the case of covenant. I think that honestly it does not matter the biological aspect of it. I think even if you make the argument of like, well, what about the physiological changes that happen? I think that those can be helpful advantages, but I don't think that they are what determine the child's future and destiny. I don't think that that's what determines a parent's future and destiny of either of their relationship aspects. I think what it comes down to is that commitment, that willingness, and the time investment that they have with one another, which I think can be summed up in that covenant relationship with one another as well. If they're both belonging to the same sealed family and living up to those covenants, I'm thinking like even long-term, right, when the child can make their own covenants, that's where I think that, okay, that's where their family could be. So because of that, I think realistically the child could go to either parents and still have a bright future. I think if we're going purely based off of the work put in, I mean, the two parents put in just as much work to give the child as far as like their sperm and egg donation, it sounds like. But yeah, I would still say, just based off of the limited facts that I know, I would have it go to the single mother.
Yeah, I think that's a good clarification based on what we know.
I also wonder if there's a bit of a gender gap on this issue. Then
There also might be a bias because we were presented with the story of the single mother, not the story
very true.
of two parents.
It could very well be that.
True.
A potential legal implication I just thought of as well is your embryos are your property. I wouldn't be surprised if a third party steals your property and sells it to another. Do you know, Nephi? I know at some point, like, you don't have claims to it anymore. Just how the early saints all got kicked out of Missouri, but they weren't able to go back and say, hey, this was my land that I got kicked off of, right? Because it had already been sold by someone and then sold by someone and then sold by someone. I'm not sure when your claims to your property that someone steals end, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was a really major argument for the couple to keep the kid.
Depending on what the property is, because it's called conversion. If you convert someone's property, then you're taking what's theirs and using it for your purposes. But especially like, at least specifically in the case of like 20 years, for instance, when it comes down to property, well, if A sells to B and then B sells to C and C sells to D, and then we come along saying, whoa, A, it was never your property to sell in the first place. Well, what happens to everybody after that? Are we going to domino effect and say all of you guys have to pay back that person before you? That's where the courts say, no, we can go after A, but really the property will go down to D, most likely.
Fascinating. Cool. Well, man, I really am so grateful for y'all's willingness to hit these with me. I'm sorry I wasn't more prepared on them. If I was, probably could have made things even more juicy. More details, better facts, whatever. But I appreciate y'all participating with an incomplete presentation, and it's so fun actually going to step out with you. I hope that our kids listen to it and are able to tell us their own solid arguments today. That'll be really cool.
It's good that we have
Liberia.
one-sided stories, so that when we agree with them, our listeners, our many listeners, will be like, "Oh, well, of course they chose the right option."
Yes, that's right. Our many listeners. Okay. Excuse me. Liberia. Does anyone know much of the history of how Liberia came to be? Any takers?
Well,
Probably
I know
some
that
colonial province at one point.
it was a U.S. one.
That is correct. You want to
US
share what you know,
moved in and it was
Nephi?
like-
And maybe try maybe getting closer to your mic again or something. You're pretty quiet again.
So weird. I mean, I'm just on my phone. I don't know why I didn't know too much, but essentially, in a nutshell, yeah, U.S. came in, set up like proxy U.S. government, and that was Liberia.
All right. Very nice. Thank you. So, interesting thing with the acquisition. So, the acquisition with Liberia, a lot of it was actually done through a society called the American Colonialization Society. Oh, really?
Colonization.
In my mind, I heard myself say it as like colonization, as in like your colon, and I was like, oh, that's funny.
Colony.
Mm.
Yeah.
Colony.
The American
And colonial.
Colonization Society. Not
Which is
necessarily.
not governmental.
What's the term when you judge people in the past based on your own present?
Presentism.
Presentism. Thank you. So I'm going to be a little bit presentist in saying that this society wasn't necessarily a super great one. I think the people who were running it, well, are mixed. So basically, they made a bunch of like deals, land acquisitions, or also kind of shady land acquisitions, right, to get this territory in Liberia. And out of parts of some people genuinely wanting to have a place for African Americans in America who had been, they view, who were wrongly taken out of Africa. They wanted to create this colony of Liberia for them to be able to go back. And part of that is like good intentions of people wanting to try and right a wrong and let people go back to a land where they might fit in more or have their own, basically. And part of it also too was people who wanted to get black people out of the country. So not just like all history and all things in life, it's mixed, right? Things are going on. So that was in 1816. Fast forward about 100 years, Liberia is now an independent country and is no longer an American colony. And there was a substantial movement of African Americans who went to Liberia, though. And in the year 1927, oh, darn it, I lost his first name. King is his last name. No. Well, that's funny. King something. I can't see it either. That's way too funny. So this guy, President King, gets elected to be the president.
Sorry, just real quick. It's Charles D.B. King.
Yes, Charles D.B. King. And the funny part with his election is he won 15 times more votes than there were electorates in the entire country. Yeah. Just let
Makes
that mic
sense.
up right there. Yeah. So this guy is a bit. So right off the bat, he's a bit of a more moral dubious man. And as soon as he won the election, Thomas, like Brooklyn was saying, Thomas Faulkner was immediately accusing him and his cabinet, his presidency, whatever, of nepotism and fraud and of the use of slavery in Liberia. And so the League of Nations, not the United Nations, didn't exist at the time, the League of Nations launched an investigation in which they found that he was indeed taking part in basically everything accused. He was taking part in nepotism and fraud and embezzling funds and was using a lot of the local or neighboring tribes of Liberia used my very brief research and summary understanding is that he basically contracted slaves from these tribes to build certain public infrastructure projects, essentially. Big scandal. He actually didn't serve jail time, but he did get kicked out. Oh man, I swapped out my slides. I asked the Grok this time, Grok AI, to make a video, to make a picture of someone in Liberia stuffing ballot boxes, and this is what they gave me. And I thought it was really funny that this guy didn't have legs and was like in the middle of the table.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was like, that's
sweet.
yeah, a little funny.
It didn't seem weird at first.
Yeah, but my question for y'all, morally, the question. Oh, Charles, that's his name. Yeah, so Charles King. Was it worse that his recent ancestors had been enslaved themselves? Did that make his use of slavery worse than it otherwise would have been? Or, in a way, was he kind of more off the hook to kind of have a, oh, well, it was done to us kind of thing? Does that make sense? What do you
Yeah, I
guys think?
see it in like as far as like a less racial perspective, would it be more justifiable or more so for Japan to have launched a nuclear bomb on New York and Sacramento because we had bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Would you say that's comparable?
I don't know
Yeah,
if that's comparable.
because
Not comparable in
yes.
in the situation, but comparable in the logical.
Essentially, that since Japan has been nuked, do they have some sort of moral high ground where they now can either are they, if they were to nuke someone, is it more morally excusable for them, or is it morally even worse because they know, or not even know, because he was not slaved himself, but he has a closer historical connection, right? Maybe his family's relatives or his ancestors, right, have felt the impacts of that closer than anyone alive today, right, in comparison. So,
Well, I think it's more of a question about objective wrong, right? Just because someone punches me in the face, do I have a right to punch them back? I don't know. Well, maybe I do in that case. But that's a bad analogy.
Yeah.
But let's say someone punched, 3 generations
That
back,
actually does
or
not
great
seem
great great grandpa. I don't think I'd have a right to punch their great 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 grandson's person.
I'm not trying to say that it's right, because I think that question's easy to answer. That obviously their use of slavery was still wrong. But my question is it extra bad that does he have a higher level of moral responsibility because he has seen, or not seen, but he's more closely connected to the suffering that results from slavery? Does he have is he extra wrong in his actions, or because he's experienced, not him, he was not a slave, but because he has felt more of the harms of slavery, does that give him more leniency?
Okay,
Yeah,
I see.
and again to clarify, they weren't even the same slaveries, too, right? Like the government wasn't the government of Liberia. In my short research and understanding, they weren't purchasing slaves, and they weren't owning the children of these slaves. I'm not sure what it was like for the tribes, right? Their policies, but the government was contracting this slave labor essentially. So is he? That's what I'm wondering. Is it if it was a American who was the president of Liberia, and a German ancestry American, right? So a white person, would it have been the same level of badness for them to use this contract slavery, or would it have been not as bad, or would it have been worse? Does that make sense? We're
see what
definitely in
you're
the
Let me draw another equivalent.
absolutely.
So like how us and our ancestors were.
Hold on, Tanner. Sorry, I don't. I heard Brooklyn just declared her opinion strong, and so I'm going to give her an opportunity to explain it a little bit first. But so, yeah, she just said she thinks it's absolutely worse.
I think if he has experienced any of the effects of that harm done, the slavery, if he's experienced the effects of it, if he knows about it, if he knows about the effects it has caused to his family, then it's absolutely worse for him to be deliberately causing the same harm to someone else.
Okay, thank you. Tanner, you go ahead. Yeah, please share your thoughts.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I think it's worse. Just to draw, hopefully, a more equivalent thing, like how our ancestors were kicked out of Nauvoo, had an extermination order. It would be like the modern day, for us, would be kicking out all the Californians who are coming in, taking our homes, voting left, and all this stuff, and us kicking them out of their homes and sending them across to California again or something. And I think, yeah, I'm with you, Brooklyn, that it's 100% worse because we still feel the effects of that, and we know better. I think it even says in the scriptures, like, it's worse for the Nephites to sin because they do know better.
Okay.
I want to add in the fact that after the Mormons, the members of the church, came west, they were kicking out the Native Americans out of their lands and fighting them, trying to exterminate them. But they weren't supposed to be doing that.
Right. You got any thoughts on that one? Sorry, not on what Brooklyn said, but on this.
On the idea, I don't.
Yeah.
No, that's good. I'll kind of bring it in a bit. I feel like there are degrees of closeness that impact, for sure. I think, I would agree that if someone, I agree specifically with the phrase that Brooklyn used with deliberately causing that harm, because if something bad happened to you and you cause that same harm out of revenge or spite, for instance, then it can get from an even worse source, or at least a potentially worse source if the other person caused it unintentionally or at least ignorant of what the real effects were. I do think that there are times where people would want to flip on that, though. For instance, I feel like it's very popular in the US for people to say that, oh, of course it would be worse. If someone does this to you, then you should take the moral high ground and you understand the bad effects, so don't reciprocate, right? At the same time, I feel like there's also a large portion of the US that I feel like flips on that if we were to talk specifically about Israel and Palestine. I feel like that's one of the more hotly debated topics of the day.
No, I'm stopping you right there. That's my next slide. So no.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. Before we transition over to that, though, I had one last question in mind. Now that I heard everyone's thoughts, and we all think that it is worse, I have a new side question for you. Okay, so a initial quick assumption. I'm assuming that Tanner, you are against paying reparations to Black people. Brooklyn, I believe, is for it. Is that right?
I don't know.
You gotta have opinions sometimes.
I have opinions, but it's complicated.
Okay, well, we gotta keep moving. Nephi, I think you could go either way. I think you're opposed. Nephi, Tanner, am I right? Guesses?
I'm opposed.
Opposed.
My ancestors didn't even have slaves.
Okay.
Many of our ancestors were indentured servants in England, and they came to the U.S. for a better life. So I don't think that I have any responsibility. And even if my ancestors did own slaves, I don't think I'd have a responsibility because I never did.
Okay. And then Nephi, what was I right? My guess for you?
I think you're right as far as it could go either way, because I think Tanner has decent logic that look, if he never caused any of the harm, why would he be forced to pay for any of the reparations. But I think it's also difficult when it's on a societal level because then bystanders, you have accomplices. It's a big muddled mess. The thing that I think most recently, just I think 2 days ago, that kind of stunned me. I was like, wait a second. Is Doctrine and Covenants? I'll have to find the exact verse again. But it does talk about how if you or if your enemy comes against you and like it's like just like totally damages you, for instance, or if you do that against them, then even unto the first, into the second, the third, and even into the fourth generation, if that fourth generation does not, or it's even required of that fourth generation to pay fourfold of what the damages that were caused. And that blew me away. I was like, wait a second, how come I never saw this? But that to me sounds a lot like reparations, even though they were never the original party.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that, Nephi, if that's all right.
Wait, well, sorry. I didn't want us to go so down the rabbit hole.
Opinions here.
Oh,
No complexity.
I just want opinions. You can have complexity, but you got to say something. So my question then of discussion I want to posit is, are these related? And a lot of my reasons for why I'm opposed to reparations have to do with this idea of children needing to pay for the sins of their parents. But if I think that this man is worse for his actions of slavery, for basically a generational connection, right? That he should know better. How is that different than saying that a later generation is? Does this make sense? Basically, I wonder if I have some cognitive dissonance, to where in this instance I am all for this idea of generational connection when it comes to responsibility, by saying that he has an even greater responsibility to avoid slavery. Whereas when it comes to the thought of paying reparations, I'm like, what? I don't have this connection to my ancestors' wrongs. Does that make sense? What do you guys think? Are they connected? Yay, nay?
I think they're
Go ahead.
connected, but in different ways. Yeah, I would say that as far as white, male, middle class, privileged people that have this connection with the perpetrators, I would say it's a different connection than what Charles would have had with the victim, but it is still a connection nonetheless, at least cross-generational. And that I can say that, yeah, I think there's cross-generational connection. To the extent and to the effect and to the impacts of those, I think we would disagree.
Okay. Sorry to have cut you off earlier, Tanner. If you'd like to share your thoughts on Nephi's thought now, or comment more directly to my thought, either one. You got the floor.
I think it comes down to your personal choices. You can be influenced and affected by your past and by your ancestors, but you can still make the right choice and you can still do better. That doesn't mean I have to pay for the sins of my father. Are we responsible for Adam and Eve eating the fruit of the tree? No, we're not. We feel the effects of it, but we're not responsible for that, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
Okay, can I just share the scripture?
I do think you have a really good point with your D and C verses there, Nephi. I don't know, 1 or 2 weeks ago, just listened to a podcast where they were talking about those, and I do not feel like I remember well enough what some of their answers were. So if you would like to present on that, that would be a really fascinating topic. But
okay,
I think
it's Doctrine and Covenants 98, like 44 through 47. That's specifically 47.
Cool. Thank you. And I think I'll let you. We'll connect back again to your thought now, Nephi, with Palestine. As we know, the Jewish people experienced the largest and possibly most ugly Holocaust that the world had ever seen up to that point, you know? And now there's a lot of accusations that they are causing a ethnic genocide in Gaza. Some numbers that people use to declare this, well, not to declare, to try to show this connection, argue this connection. Over 60% of buildings in Gaza have been destroyed or damaged. In Gaza City, 74% of the buildings are destroyed or damaged. Over 1.6 million Palestinians in Gaza are homeless and living in makeshift shelters. There are 42 million tons of debris in Gaza, 14 times more than from all previous wars since 2008. Removing this rubble is estimated to take 14 years. Rebuilding Gaza to its pre-war state could cost at least $80 billion. Under a near-total blockade by Israel, it could take 350 years to rebuild the economy. There are likely tens of thousands of pieces of unexploded ordnance in Gaza, and it could take 25 to 30 years to clear them. Since a ceasefire in January 2024, the 24th, 24 Palestinians have died from unexploded ordnance. Hospitals, clinics, water treatment facilities, universities, mosques, and churches are overwhelmingly destroyed. Around 70% of Gaza's limited agricultural land has been destroyed. Hazardous chemicals, materials, and asbestos contaminant in Gaza are now in Gaza's water supply and air. About 800,000 tons of debris are likely contaminated with asbestos. That's from Real Life Lore, fantastic educational YouTube channel. So my the connection, the overall claim is that the level of destruction that Gaza has seen is essentially a like ethnic cleansing or a genocide. That what's left of Gaza, people can't live there. Like, it's not going to work. I mean, the very air that they breathe, the very water they drink, is likely now contaminated with asbestos. It is inhabitable essentially, and the well, that's my big summary. I'm sorry for having cutting you off earlier, Nephi, and I'll let you have the floor again. How would you like to tie this back to our Charles King and your thought that you had?
Oh, man. Wow. I think that this is definitely an issue that I'm more proximate with. And it does definitely add nuance, for sure. But I think that this also just further shows that it depends on someone's closeness to those events and the degree of it. Because on one hand, we might think, oh, well, Israelis, they come from the Jewish Zionists, the Jews who fled Europe and who did face the Holocaust, right? Incredibly horrific conditions, everything that you said. And then turn around and do this to Gaza? Right? I feel like that's the assumption that we can cross apply that and say, like, wait, why don't they have this responsibility against it? I think at the same time, at least in talking with Israelis, I feel like this is the very reason why they take this action as well, is because they do feel like threats by Hamas for calling for the complete annihilation of Israel and all Israelis, or all Jews, is reminiscent of the very same things that they faced during the Holocaust. So not only is it, okay, we know, like, coming from an Israeli perspective, do we know that, wow, like, these people want to kill us? But they also can see that, and the world has also let it happen before. That we've seen that they want to kill us, and we have that expressive action, like, yeah, it's possible. I find that harder to connect with Charles King. I don't think that there's as much of a implication there, unless it was like him using slavery to help defend against slavery. I don't know that. But at least from Palestinian
At least-
perspective,
Right.
Isher first sure seems like it is just a turnaround of using the very same weapon that was used against the Jews, now used against Palestinians.
Yeah. And I love how you prefaced your comment with this idea of you have there's these like spheres of closeness essentially, right? That are super different. I mean, yeah, if Mexico invaded the U.S., killed a bunch of civilians, took a bunch of hostages, oh my gosh, how would the U.S. respond? I would be skeptical. It would be very different than what we see in Gaza.
Be no more Mexico.
I think there would be a serious call for a total takedown, and so I just going to your point about these spheres of closeness, and at least what I figured you were saying with Charles King, the connection, and my hope was to show how I guess maybe call into question how much you really can say, oh, such and such person should know better, because each individual just is facing their own different circumstance and affliction in the moment. I don't know. I owe an apology, y'all. I would have loved to have transitioned these themes and topics more closely and given us more time to hit these things more, but I really do think that we've done the best we can today, and I hope that our kids will kind of see how real life this kind of discussion is for our policymakers, our senators, and our president, our governors, our generals. They don't have all day to think of the perfect solution for problems that don't have perfect solutions. I think it's so important to have opinions on hard and painful things, because it can help you see your importance as a citizen of your community, of your country, and of your world. Because perfect solutions don't exist, and the best thing you can do is advocate for the one that you think is right. I don't have much more to say. Takeaway on that? I don't know. Anyone have anything else they want to add? I feel like I've turned this into a bit of a downer mood right now, and in a way I don't think that's inappropriate, to have some solemn attitude towards painful things, but you go ahead, Tanner.
I think you've done well. I think that a good takeaway is that we are all responsible for our actions, and we should try to choose the best we can and to do the most good as we possibly can, even despite our backgrounds and other shortcomings that we have.
I think I'll just piggyback off that and say, 100% agree. We are responsible for our ministry, as well as we are responsible for filling the space that God has given us, which includes reaching out to others, which includes being an active participant in these spheres of influence that have these generational traumas.
Y'all are gonna have such lucky kids to have y'all as parents. I'm sorry, Tanner, you do have lucky kids. It's not just your future ones that will be lucky. And
only the future ones. Current ones are lost, man.
Ari and Tommy, man, they got the short end of the stick there. Levi, I'm not sure when/if the kids will happen for you then, but my understanding is you can't do in vitro for a man yet, but medicine advances every day, so.
I'm gonna push back on that one. Yeah, I'm gonna say no.
I love you guys. I feel so blessed and grateful that you're willing to have spicy discussions with me, that we can remind ourselves the importance of having opinions and doing our best to help those that we have in our areas of influence. So, have a blessed and thanks for the discussion. Thanks for sharing views that helped broaden my mind. With that, we'll end this recording of Unfiltered and definitely Unqualified today. It was
Amen.
lovely, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Peace.